then I like went to John Davis and was like, so these grand challenges, he's like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And you're like, okay, that's interesting, because like mysteries of the universe are still out there. And there was a grand challenge around life and diversity and that. So when I went to say, all right, for a strategic plan for science, the Smithsonian, how do we really capitalize on the great things that we're already doing? And frankly, it does fall into sort of two major buckets that are not surprising. One of them is this issue that we still have not well defined, and I hate the name mysteries of the universe, because at least you could put solving in front of it, because otherwise it's like, wow, there's all these mysteries out there. Okay, what is the Smithsonian doing? What are we contributing? And we're contributing a lot in that area, from really understanding the origins of life in the solar system to on our planet in the solar system, and then looking for life in planets around other stars, especially with the Giant Magellan Telescope. And for those of you who don't know, it's probably one of the worst kept secrets. Tomorrow, the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory has a major announcement about a black hole. And obviously they image black holes. That was actually done by us, for those of you who aren't aware of that. And the Event Horizon Telescope has imaged another black hole. And it's very exciting. And I swear to God, I hope the image doesn't look exactly like the other one. I actually haven't seen the image yet, even though I'm doing some of the events tomorrow for it. But let's just say it's a black hole that's a lot closer to home that we'll be talking about tomorrow. So that's, exciting. So that's one whole bucket. And then to me, if you look at the other bucket of research that we really excel in, it's around this issue of ecosystems, threats to biodiversity, and whether it's a marine ecosystem or a terrestrial ecosystem. A lot of the work we have been doing, and obviously that all of you are involved in, is really around this issue around sustainability. So how do we get to just that, life on a sustainable planet? And what I really love about, as I've learned over the last year, the research we're doing is, to me, at this intersection of where people and nature come together, and how can we come up with resilient systems that both work for the planet, work for the humans that live on the planet. And one of the things that really catalyzed my thinking about this was trying to understand the push for 30 by 30, which you think, right, this is great, right? What's to not like about saying we need to preserve big sections of the planet? But as you all well know, which 30 are you actually protecting? And does it work for all communities to just say, we need to preserve biodiversity in your area? How do we make those solutions that actually work for communities? And so how do we make sure that as we come up with resilient solutions, that we don't perpetuate the environmental injustice that characterizes, a lot of the history of science and work around the environment. And so what I've been doing is working closely with the unit directors, and I'm starting to laugh just because I decided to start with oceans, partially because, and I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying they were really worried about that, because a lot of the work we do, such as the Reef to Ridge program or movement of life in the oceans, these things are connected. I know they're connected. The reason we started focusing on oceans is because there's a lot of philanthropic organizations out there that focus on oceans. And we have to go to where our audience is. And if we want to expand and really build on what we're doing, we really have to think about how do we talk to donors about what we're doing. And what I clearly see, and I'm sure all of you know, is there's a lot of philanthropic organizations who say we're here to save the oceans. All right, they have to understand ultimately that they need to save terrestrial ecosystems along with ocean ecosystems. We all get that, but let's start with oceans. And so we've been having some deep discussions, bringing in people from the units, and we're preparing a document that really focuses on an ocean strategy. And frankly, it's really going to focus around reefs and the work we do on other protective coastal systems like mangroves and oyster grasses. There's going to be a section on specifically the work we do around blue carbon. And then around fisheries, the work, this encompasses some of the work we do around marine protected areas and some of the work we do around looking at invasive species. So we're still working on how do we articulate this in a way that makes sense scientifically, but is understandable by our stakeholders, whether that's congressional stakeholders, whether it's philanthropic stakeholders. And so how do we put that together into a picture? The other key part to this is obviously the work we do in terrestrial ecosystems. And what's been really exciting to me, and Jared and Lacey know this because I've asked for some extra briefings from them on this, the work under movement of life, I find just really exciting, really sound work. And so when I came in, you know, as a geologist coming in and having done this at NASA as chief scientist, you know, you're really looking sort of what's the caliber of the science we're doing. And I are sort of at NASA, we really looked at it in sort of three buckets. You know, where are we leading? Where are we making significant contribution? And frankly, where are we kind of following? And what's been exciting to me coming into this job is really seeing how many areas we're actually really leading in. Like we're really out there doing, you know, the cutting edge research that we should be doing. And so that is super encouraging. And a lot of the work that I see coming out of movement of life is definitely in that category. So when we look at the kind of what I would argue is pulling from Conservation Commons, this phrase of working landscapes, just leaving off the seascapes for now, don't be upset, I know they're connected, but this idea of working landscapes. So whether it's at a place like Impala, whether it's the work we do in the Mara with tracking, the work we do out in the American Prairie Reserve with the Great Plains Initiative, bird-friendly coffee, chocolate-friendly coffee, it goes back to this issue of where humans and nature are intersecting and how do we find solutions that work for both. And so I think this work is really critical. It really plays to what people are looking at right now because of the climate crisis, is how do we come up with actionable solutions for communities? What are the big, you know, and so this is what I'm doing with the ocean folks. So I'm going to come to you guys with this same thing sometime in the next couple months. You know, what are the big questions you're trying to answer? What are the significant contributions that we're making? What impact are we going to have in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? An initial pushback I got, we're the Smithsonian, we do long-term research. That's great, but we have a climate crisis and we have people who need solutions. So where are we going in 3 years? Where are we going in 5 years? And then what do we need? What would it take to take a good project or a great project and get it to the next level and scale it, allow it to have more impact? Because frankly, that's where my office comes in. How can I go help you find the dollars you need to take your project to the next level, to expand it, to scale it? Or if you're happy with where it is, that's great too. So how do we find this? How do we articulate it? How do we tell that story? So those are my two sort of biggest science buckets. The other thing I'm really working on, and I hope I'm not going to, I always say I'm going to talk for 5 minutes and then I talk for like a half an hour. The other big area is around is around environmental justice. And the Smithsonian, in my mind, I like to talk to people sometimes about like, what is it that sets us apart from Stanford, from any other, you know, Princeton, Yale? Like, what is it that makes the Smithsonian special? Because frankly, you could say, well, why don't we just go fund this research at some other place if I'm talking to a philanthropist? So to me, the Smithsonian has this superpower of not only do we do cutting edge research, not only are we coming up with these resilient solutions, we have a unique ability to communicate it to the public through our museums, through our web platforms, through our educational programs. That is the superpower of the Smithsonian. We have both. No other organization has what we have. And so I would argue, and a question to you, are we actually utilizing that to the extent that we could be? And I think all of us agree no, right? Because I know I've heard incredibly from scientists going, I'm doing cool work and nobody knows I'm doing it. And so that's the other big thrust of my office is going to be, and I've got some people right now working on a science communications plan. I'm bringing in a junior level person in my office to really work with all of you, to work with the units to say, how are these stories? How do we figure out ways to amplify them? Where do we need to be? How do we, and I was just meeting with a guy last week who came up with stealing great ideas from other organizations to how do we get journalists to understand what we're doing better and get the word out? And some of it, frankly, is can we embed journalists with some of you and actually follow you around so that they understand the cool stuff that we're doing? So really working on this science communication piece. And ultimately, it'll also be, I'm also working really closely with Monique Chisholm, the head of education, and a group that's working for the strategic plan on STEM education, because are we really getting the science units to all work together to really coherently take our scientific work and messaging and translate that into educational programs? And again, this is really critical to me because this is what sets us apart from any other organization. Lots of organizations do cutting edge science. Some organizations communicate to the public. We do both. And we can amp up that communication game in a way where I think we can have real impact. So I will say, I was supposed to get a big chunk of money in the federal budget this year. It did not come, largely because of Ukraine, which, okay, we all understand that, are very sympathetic to that. I got a little bit of money, and there's been some pools that have been released, one for a limited number of climate fellows, because obviously everybody's studying climate, whether they intend to or not. There's a climate link, frankly, to everything we do, right? Because if you're out there looking at things, there's environmental stresses that are being caused by climate change. So you're studying climate, whether you wanted to or not. How do we talk about it in that frame? And the money from the White House was intended to be for climate related problems. So I'm going to create some fellowships. I have a pool announcement that I don't think it's come out yet. It's supposed to come out any day for a competitive pool. I'm trying to, out of this first year of money, do fewer larger grants so that people can have more impact, but I'll look at smaller grants too. And then next year, I am hoping that I get the full federal allocation, which instead of the 1.3 million I got this year is supposed to be more like 5, 6, 7 million. I am not jumping up and down optimistic about that. It's in the PBR, so it's in the president's budget request. But we all know what's happening on an international and national level and the pressures on the congressional budget. So I can keep hoping for federal money, but frankly, this is why, and I see Cole on here, this is why it goes back to the philanthropic piece, because the Smithsonian has really suffered from a loss of earned income, which they're trying to fix, even crazy thing like NIFs. But frankly, we really need to up our philanthropy game, especially when it comes to funding great science and climate related science. There's a lot of money out there, and we need to figure out how to better obtain it. And part of it is, this whole issue of communicating better, communicate. We have to be a leader. We have to be seen as a leader, and we have to be showing up in places where big donors show up. So the other thing, and I'll end on this, is right now I'm scoping up what does it take to have a bigger presence at COP this coming year, because that's where donors are going to be present, and we have to be there also. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to have questions from you guys.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's really encouraging and I don't know, just refreshing to hear some of these ideas coming down, and exciting to see kind of where our synergies might line up across Movement of Life projects and LSP. So thank you for taking that time to talk with us. And let's see, I see Mel has a hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I just second what Lacey said. It's really exciting to hear from you. You mentioned, actually, before you got on, we were talking about an education initiative that we were just working on, Women on the Move, which was a joint project between education staff at the National Zoo and SERC. And they got a small grant from the American Women's History Initiative to put together this program, which was a series of 3 webinars. So, I think we do really well at the Smithsonian when we get these opportunities, like the kind you're talking about with the Climate Fellow and the Pathfinder. And really specific, looking at research questions and things like that. It's really fantastic to hear how you've really understood the value of movement of life and working land and seascapes and all the fantastic sciences going on. And, that we need to tell these stories better in order to support them. I think one of the challenges we're really facing with both programs is that, we can be good at getting these internal opportunities that are very directed, like a fellowship and things like that. We struggle with more of the central support for program managers and things that are just, these are pan unit institutional initiatives that involve multiple units. So it can often be a challenge to have a director that really takes that on because it is these multi-units. So that's one of our concerns, I think, or in terms of like with the end of commons and redirecting towards life on a sustainable planet. It fits so well. I think that's one of the things that's really exciting. But with commons, there was this support for kind of the essential sort of things, like the program manager and managers and some kind of support to really encourage us to work together, because we are good at going out and getting funds for our projects. It's just more challenging when we try to do it because of the structure of the Smithsonian, which is challenging because of it's decentralized, but it's also, we've got a lot of so many opportunities, but a lot of times these types of initiatives are more challenging. So anyway, it's just something that it would be great to hear how you envision that, and it's probably tied in a lot with the increasing our philanthropic efforts around these. But that, and also I'd like to say, you mentioned these 3 questions about what are we doing in 3 years, what are we doing in 5 years, that we're going to get into on the landscape side. And I think, this group and also the Working Land and Seascapes group, we're already ready to kind of dive into that. And I think we're the perfect groups to start addressing that. So, maybe we can go ahead and move ahead, at least in preparation, okay, we've got the seascapes and we've got the marine kind of on track, but we can be ready to really jump in. So
I would love that. I mean, that's, because one of the things I've noticed, I'm trying to find a nice way to say that, it goes back to your earlier point. When I've tried to get the units to do some of this without maybe a lot of, and I'm trying to say this as nicely as possible, without maybe, let's just call it hand holding. Mm-hmm. We devolve into, I do this, they do this, they do this. And I get a document that looks like that. And I'm like, what is the science question that we're trying to address? Yes, the work is done at the units. Ultimately, right? All the work is done at the units. There's no pan that does the work. The work is done at the units. People work together across the units. And my challenge to the directors is, you need to support this, because trying to pull it out of the units and create another structure has not worked. Because frankly, I appreciate the fact that Commons had some really great successes, but the bulk of the money was going to the program managers, not to the scientists. And we have to find a model that works better, where more of the money is going to the science and less to the program management. Does that mean we don't need program managers? No, we do need program managers, but we need to think about how to fund them. Because, for example, if somebody is doing majorly grant management, we can pay for that person out of overhead and not pay for them out of philanthropic support. If they're doing more advancement philanthropic support, they can't be classified as advancement, they have to be classified. So are we really thinking about how we're using the money, what the person's role is, and how we pay for them? And right now, the Smithsonian is in a world of hurt of money, just in a world of hurt. I mean, we've lost over $50 million from COVID. The Central Trust was running at a $12 million to $15 million structural deficit a year before COVID. Mm-hmm. And all that has to be fixed. Just think of it as your own budget, right? We were spending more money than we had. We've been doing that for years. It's not sustainable, right? And so the problem is then you have to prioritize and say, am I going to prioritize bringing more money in for science, or am I going to bring money in for program managers? And I know I need program managers, but I'm going to have to really push, for one thing, on directors to say, you have to support pan-institutional work. It is part of your job, and I'm going to judge you on it. And so rather than trying to create more structures to allow for pan-institutional work, we need to change how this place works. And I know probably all of you are like, that's like beating my head against a wall. All right. I'm hopefully going to take the lump on my forehead for you and say, I'll beat my head against the wall. We need to find ways to get people to be able to work together. I clearly understand people need proposal support. We need proposal managers. But frankly, those people, we can find ways to pay out of overhead as long as we are careful about it. Overhead is there for a reason. That's a whole nother nightmare topic I won't drag you into, but it's something the directors and I are really working on, because there's a huge frustration on the part of the directors. We'd love to do more kind of big, like NSF, Pan-Smithsonian projects, but universities do that really successfully because they have people they pay for. Those people are paid for out of overhead. Let's figure out how to fix that.
Great. Well, we're here to help. So we appreciate you volunteering to beat your head in for us. Just definitely reach out if there are things we can do, because I mean, I know it's not an easy job, having worked on a lot of different pan-institutional initiatives. It's challenging, and it's great to hear that is a passion for you. So.
Yeah, and there's more stories of failures than there are of successes. So how can we get past that? And my model is, let's put the management of pan-institutional initiatives at the units, and then I hold them accountable for being pan-institutional. And if they're not, they'll get dinged for it. And I've made that clear. So we'll see if that works. We're all going to be politely skeptical, right? So and to this point of, what are the major science questions you're trying to answer? What are your 3, 5, 10-year objectives? What are your, what do you need? Start working on that. Okay. And great. As soon as you guys have something ready to present to me, come present to me. I would love it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
I don't see any more hands. I don't know if
anyone else. And I just had a quick follow-up. When you mentioned that there will be a process similar to the oceans process for landscapes. Same. Yeah. Okay. But we're okay to bring you.
Go ahead and get started. We just haven't done it yet. But frankly, a lot of this, to me, what's driving me is COP, so if I create that as a deadline, which is November, I've at least got to have some of these stories together, because one of the things, if we're thinking of rolling out Life on a Sustainable Planet at COP, it's obviously been quietly launched, but to me, I get a little frustrated with Smithsonian initiatives that get launched and there's really no there. And so to me, it's been really important to say, what is it we're actually trying to do? What are the questions we're trying to answer? And we have a document that the directors help put together, because I need them to own it. But frankly, it's at like the not 30,000 foot level, it's at like the 50,000 foot level. And so I need to drill down, because if I'm going to a donor, I need to say, here's what, if you give money to the Smithsonian, your money is going to help us understand how to manage wildlife across sub-Saharan Africa by looking at these data, or by collecting these kind of data. Here's what I can do for you. Here's what I'm understanding about the threats to populations. Here's the work we're doing. I just made all that up, obviously. But, that's the kind of thing that ultimately we need. Everybody's bought in at the 50,000 foot level. Now we need to get down to the 10,000 foot level. And that's hard, because that's when everybody tends to just splinter. And again, I thought oceans would be easier. I was wrong, but we're going to drive that through. And then I know we have all these great stories of the working landscapes work we're doing, the work you guys are doing, the work we do in American Prairie, Agua Salud. I've got great anecdotes. I need to pull that together into a story. And I know it's there. It's just a question of pulling that together. And my aim is to start working on that kind of mid late summer. So my original aim was winter. And it's just, everything slides. It's the Smithsonian.
We understand. Okay, then we I think riding on the ocean theme, we've put together a couple of short talks focused on how we can advance ocean sustainability with animal tracking. So if you're able to stay, we'd love it. If you're not, it'll be recorded and we'll send it to you after.
Okay.
So, yeah,
that'd be perfect. Yeah, I got to run. And thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you all.
Ellen.
All right. Let's see what.
Can I just put my 2 cents in, because I didn't.
Yes.
And I don't think she was as clear, but she said, like, where will we be in 3, 5, 10 years? And like when she says about managing wildlife, it's like, if we manage wildlife, then what happens with the biodiversity of that area? Like, how does that improve? Like, we have to put our stake in the ground of what we will accomplish in 3 years, 5 years, very specifically, not understanding completely, but understanding with the goal of X. So that's just my little soapbox.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's
Yeah.
great that she, I think it's super helpful that she wants to hear from us. So
Yeah.
I've been kind of struggling with how do we let her know more about what we're doing. And first of all, I think she gets it from what she was saying. I think she has a good understanding of both of our big science initiatives. And she has said we can reach out to her. And so I think we should start to address these questions, coming up with the science questions, the outcomes for 3 and 5 years, I mean, no time to waste. I think this would be, since she has said she's interested, that we should start working on that.
I completely agree, Mel. And I also think having been through, and I think there's some other people on this call that have been through the ocean thing. If we can get ahead of that and give her, like, here's this big idea, here's all the little pieces, here's 3, 5 year scientific questions. If we can present that to her on a silver platter, I think she would love us for the rest. I mean, like, we would be the greatest people, because the ocean thing has been, she started at the top, and I don't think it was efficient.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So.
Okay, are we ready for talks? Any other closing comments? Yeah, I agree. It was really great to have her here, and nice to have a green light to start working on some of the stuff we've been wanting to send her way. So, great. Okay, Autumn-Lynn, do you still want to go first, Autumn-Lynn, or which?
Sure,
What do you
I can
think?
go first.
Okay, that'd be great. So we've got Autumn-Lynn Harrison, the scientist with Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, which I'm sure everyone knows. And she's going to be talking about migratory connectivity in the oceans. Also need to turn, is this going to work with your spotlight? I think it will. Yep, okay, great.
Thanks, everyone. Ellen mentioned a lot of momentum for funding, but there's also a lot of momentum for policy change for the oceans. And so the executive committee of Movement of Life kind of thought that it would be a nice opportunity for Matt and I to just give really high level overviews of some of the work that's being done across the Smithsonian in a couple of topics related to this. And after our talks, we can chat more if you'd like about how the ocean strategy was working. Some of us were invited early and some of us were invited late, and we can show you how it's been playing out. But again, just a high level overview. And so I still get feedback in some of my talks from terrestrial ecologists that the view of the ocean in the terrestrial mindset is that it's this vast, uniform place where animals just kind of get taken by the wind or the currents to their places with no real agency of their own. And of course, all of us on this call know that's not true, but just a couple of weeks ago, I heard this perspective about albatross movements. So it's still there, but really marine habitats are more like this. They're really dynamic, spatially and temporally over short and long time scales. They peel off, they move, they shift, and they congregate prey. So animals track these habitats much like humans might track food trucks. So animals are able to see where the food truck is today, get their seafood platter, and then find it again in the next neighborhood tomorrow. And that has led to kind of complicated research topic for the oceans of migratory connectivity, where animals are moving day by day, season by season, and not between stationary sites necessarily. So migratory connectivity is, by definition, the geographic linkages of individuals and populations between different periods of migratory cycles. And this topic was defined by biologists who study passerines that do go from a stationary breeding site to a stationary stopover site to a stationary overwintering site, but marine animals are much more dynamic. The Smithsonian has a really long history in ocean exploration and specifically in researching topics of migratory connectivity of ocean animals. In the 1960s, there was a large project called the Pacific Ocean Biological Survey Program that banded nearly 2 million birds in the Pacific Ocean. And this intrepid group of young, all-male biologists went around the islands of the Pacific collecting specimens like these desiccated albatross eyeballs in the lower left. And then the one vibrantly green woman you see in this picture, she was essentially the program manager. She was the assistant secretary of this program. And reading her notes, she had a really long influence on this group. The project again ranged around Pacific Islands. It was originally called the Pacific Ocean Ornithological Program, but because that acronym spelled the word poop, it was soon changed to the Pacific Ocean Biological Survey Program. No joke, here's poop. Lower right. So congratulations, Movement of Life, on not having such an acronym. But the project was focused on birds. It was funded by the Department of Defense to think about birds as potential germ warfare agents. And if an agent was released on a Pacific island or in Japan, for example, would it come back to mainland US via bird vectors? And there was originally a large oceanographic component that got struck for funding. But after 10 years of work, this culminated in a monograph in the 70s that has about 50 different maps, like this one on the lower left, that was the first picture of migratory connectivity for Pacific seabirds through this banding project of 2 million birds. So this is a sooty tern connectivity plot where birds nest on islands and then were either resighted or captured by fisheries. And all of these connections were plotted for the first time to see what these vector connections would be. So during this decadal program, there were surveys, specimens collections, 100 cruises, and nearly 2 million seabirds that were banded. Over 2,000 specimens still live in the Natural History Museum, and countless ectoparasite samples were collected, but most of those went to Fort Detrick and were never seen again, including, this is also the case for blood samples. There was some pretty nefarious germ warfare stuff that happened during this program. And the way that we learned about migratory connectivity in the 60s was through birds being either encountered again at sea or recaptured, most frequently by fisheries. These records are from the Smithsonian archives, showing a band that was attached to a bird and then was caught by a tuna vessel in 1961 and then returned to us. And the Natural History Museum still has file cabinets of cards like the one on the right that shows these birds were recovered by tuna fisheries. And even NASA came into play during the space exploration years. These tracking ships would be out to sea waiting for the folks to come back from space, and they while away the hours fishing for mahi-mahi, but occasionally would catch a goonie bird with a band attached, and the goonie bird is an albatross. These data have been really important for management, even these simple connections, knowing where the bird nests and then where it's caught at sea by tuna fisheries. And these two plots show connections of black-footed albatrosses from their nesting island in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, either Midway or the French Frigate Shoals a little farther east. And of these birds that were caught by fisheries, having just a little bit of distance and where their nesting island is makes an impact on what fishery it is that's actually catching them at sea. So birds nesting on Midway are more frequently caught in the Japanese fishing fleet because they tend to fly further west, and birds just a little farther east on French Frigate Shoals are most likely to be caught in the Hawaiian longline fisheries. So not a lot of separation in their nesting site, but quite a large separation on what fisheries is impacting them and where in the ocean they're spending time. These are the real implications of understanding migratory connectivity and linking it back to how we manage species. But of course, today we have more continuous data to give us a picture of migratory connectivity that ranges throughout the year and sometimes the life cycle of migratory animals. This is research from a paper that just came out last week or the week before from our work studying Arctic terns as a part of the Migratory Connectivity Project. This bird is carrying a little light level geolocator on a band on its leg. And this little tag also indicates when the bird is touching down on salt water. So it has a saltwater immersion sensor. The darker purple indicates when the bird's legs are getting wet, which is inferred foraging behavior. So when they're flying straight, they're migrating quickly, their legs don't touch down on land, and that's what all these, or on the water, and that's what all these yellow dots are. So this sensor can give us an indication of when the bird is actually gaining back energy during its migration, and even stopping in a new high seas protected area. So we can learn a lot from this very simple tag about energetics, physiology, and its connectivity. The Migratory Connectivity Project is probably a contemporary analogy to the Pacific Ocean Biological Survey Program. Since 2014, we've been collecting over 6 million daily locations from 23 species of birds, and many of these are ocean seabirds. So thinking about those maps from the 60s and then these continuous time series that we have today. So the major questions that we address with ocean connectivity studies across the Smithsonian, that includes STRI and SERC and NZCBI, really fall into 4 buckets. Where, when, why, and how are animals where they are, and how might this change in the future? Are they tracking an endless summer of perfect habitats? Are they going to where the food is, regardless of how hard it is to get there? And how did they do this? How are they capable of doing this? These ecological questions are really at the foundation of many of our studies. But we also want to know why and how is connectivity important? Going back to management use of these data, here's a case study from our recent paper that shows a situation by the International Whaling Commission evaluating potential hypotheses of connectivity for the western group of the North Pacific Brutus whale. And without the ability to track Brutus whale, they're pretty mysterious throughout their annual cycle. There's a little bit of genetics data, some markings data. The scientific committee looks at these different hypotheses of connectivity. Are breeding stocks separate? Do they stay separate between breeding and feeding? Or do the breeding stocks mix? And this is frequently called population connectivity in a lot of marine ecology studies. But this is how they set incidental take limits and subsistence hunt limits for whales at the International Whaling Commission, evaluating these hypotheses of connectivity and what it means for the levels of take that each breeding population can sustain. So we go through a number of models and stock assessments to get at this. So this is why connectivity work is so important. And of course, we're interested in where, when, why, and how migratory ocean animals are impacted. These impacts range from direct targeted take, like tuna that are shown in the Japanese fish market on the left, incidental take, like this Laysan albatross that has targeted a long-line fishing hook, and then take by human impacts that might seem counterintuitive, beneficial for our sustainable use planning, like offshore wind development, but perhaps impacting already vulnerable populations of seabirds. And then long-term impacts that we're only now getting a handle on. This California sea lion pup on the right is shown waiting for its mom to come back in an El Nino year, when she has to swim farther and deeper to reach cold prey resources that normally would be closer to shore, but in El Nino years are far offshore where the colder water is. So long-term tracking data has given us a window into how these large climatological impacts can affect populations, and then predict how things might change in warmer years in the future. And then finally, we're really interested in how migratory animals that are culturally and economically important to Indigenous peoples and local communities can contribute to life on a sustainable planet. This plot shows salmon recoveries that are important to local communities in the Pacific Northwest. Each dot on the terrestrial part of the map shows an Indigenous community that values salmon, and then salmon's catch at sea. So our paper in 2020 was really trying to make the point that Indigenous peoples and local communities' voice has been a little bit marginalized in the new ocean treaty process, but that local coastal communities are extremely relevant to this conversation because migratory animals connect them to the high seas. So it's not just a high seas issue of the big fishing nations, but smaller communities should have a voice in this treaty as well. And so where we stand now with connectivity data is that we have time series of animals on the left, and then we have time series of humans and fisheries on the right. So we can really overlap these continuous movements of people, for example, Global Fishing Watch's data on the right, and then the tagging of Pacific predators data on the left, and start to match up in space and time, people and animals at sea, which was originally a place that we just couldn't. 10 years ago, we did not have data like this for fisheries. It was always locked down data that ecologists could never get access to. And through Global Fishing Watch, this has really been revolutionized. And finally, I'll discuss a few ways that these data have had impact at the Smithsonian, and then how these questions are being discussed for the ocean strategy that Ellen mentioned. We know that Hector Guzman's work has been really successful in Panama through satellite tracking whales. He has shown important migratory corridors, increased protected area size, protected routes of whales. It's really amazing the work that he's been able to do in Panama. And then a lot of our work is coming together, bringing data sets together to have a major influence in international policy discussions, like our work on many species of migratory animals being talked about in treaty negotiations, but also in Arctic issues. So big syntheses are the way that you can actually convince people that something is important. The Smithsonian has been a founding member of a project called the Migratory Connectivity in the Ocean Initiative, led out of Duke University, and the Migratory Bird Center. We're on the board of this group. This is an initiative of many different partners who are bringing together our data on migratory connectivity to synthesize it in a way that decision makers can ingest and use without having to read thousands of papers to do so. So we have an online platform that brings together data that normally aren't shared. So the data owner may not want to show the tracks, but they're okay with showing derived surfaces. And what's really valuable about this system is that a person can generate a pretty beautiful easy to read report that says, hey, I'm a manager from this MPA in Ecuador. What species pass through my polygon and where are they connected to? So what other countries or what other jurisdictions should I be talking with? With the click of the button, you can get that report and all of the citations that many graduate students have synthesized that also point at this information. So it's a pretty neat system that's, I would say, still in phase one. And we're hoping to take this to another level with additional funding. This won an Ocean Award in 2020 for innovation. But like everything, I think a lot of our projects here, it had an initial investment that took it to the stage, but then that maintenance investment is often difficult to secure. I would say that marine research has been really good at compiling success stories and case studies of how tracking data has been used in conservation policy and management. And this paper really came together by people just working on a Google Doc and submitting case studies. And it might be something that could be thought about for a terrestrial paper as well. And a lot of these data have been presented and incorporated in a draft of a new ocean treaty that was supposed to be completed already, but was delayed by COVID. And this is where the momentum comes in. This treaty process should be ending soon with a new treaty that will be relevant to areas beyond national jurisdiction. But the United Nations has started a new ocean decade of sustainable use for the oceans. And that's really where our future directions at the Smithsonian could tie in to this UN Ocean Decade and has been incorporated in some of the thinking in the ocean strategy. The United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, this is a focus for the next 10 years, really this emphasis on sustainable development. And I think it's where we've all talked about the need for more social scientists to be integrated with our work. And this decade is really going to be influencing that for ocean work. So there have been 10 ocean challenges set out for impact. And I just want to highlight a few that I think the movement of life work on migratory connectivity in the ocean is really relevant to. I think we're already responding really well to its challenge too, which is to protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity. How can we incorporate tracking data in this work? But there are additional challenges focused on climate change and on sustainable use. And I think this is where we have opportunities to really ramp up partnerships and use of our data. So a couple of challenges are focused on climate change, increasing community resilience. And I think there's a lot in the tracking data that we collect that could be harnessed for these topics beyond connectivity, but really mechanistic links between animals and their environments. And so some of the topics that have come up in the ocean strategy include increasing coordination with federal agencies to ensure our movement data are being used in offshore wind development planning. BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, mostly just uses at-sea survey data, and they haven't quite figured out how to integrate tracking data yet. So that's an open frontier for us that we could really contribute to. And then perhaps ramp up partnerships with engineering and technology companies to add additional sensors to tags. I've heard from some NASA colleagues that in some places remote sensing isn't the solution because of cloud cover or weather, and having birds be climate scientists might be a nice way to measure some things that they're not able to. There is a UN challenge to expand the global ocean observing system. And a lot of this has been focused on specimen collection, biodiversity, rapid assessments. But I feel like tracking data are less integrated into that concept of global ocean observing, and that we could really better integrate with marine geo and other Smithsonian projects that focus on biodiversity and think about how migratory animals are part of that story. I also think there is more of an opportunity to pick select species, select systems where units could come together and have long-term projects to look at climate change effects. There's a UN challenge focused on education and outreach to create a digital representation of the ocean. And it would be really nice if Smithsonian Science past and present was in that digital representation. Maybe some of our data could be included in that. And then finally, I think where the real opportunity comes is to respond to challenges focused on sustainable and equitable ocean economies, capacity building, and really changing humanity's relationship with the ocean. And I think Matt will touch on some of this too, but this integration with social science is something that I've found myself really wanting to learn more about, but not who to talk to at Smithsonian, and how to think about better conducting our science in collaboration with communities, and having those linkages to help have migratory species change humanity's relationship with the ocean and show us how connected people on land are to the oceans. These are where I think Smithsonian and Movement of Life could have a big impact in some of the challenges and topics that we've been talking about with the ocean strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Autumn-Lynn. There's a lot in there to unpack, and I think it was really many excellent points, especially those last few slides about the decade of ocean's decade. So yeah.
There's a new decade every decade, but this one's focused on sustainable use. There was one on ocean exploration. I think the Census of Marine Life was a decade of ocean exploration, and yeah, other topics.
Yeah, I think so. We originally were planning to have Matt go right after you and then take questions for both of you together. Does that still sound like a good plan, or do you want to spend a few minutes with specific questions? That's a question for you, Autumn.
No, I think
or anyone.
I think holding it till the end, because there might be, integration.
That's what I think.
points.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Thanks. All right, Matt, are you ready to go? Okay, great. So we also have Matt Ogburn, who's going to speak, zoom in a little bit more to a regional level of ocean sciences, focusing on scaling up cooperative research networks. So take it away, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. And it's great to have this opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing at SERC on cooperative research networks. And thanks, Autumn-Lynn, for an excellent setup. I think it was a good decision to have you go first, because you touched on a lot of the things that I decided to leave out in hopes that you would touch on them. So excellent job of that. The work that I really want to talk about is related to a particular type of tracking technology for the oceans, and I'll get to that part. But I do want to start by highlighting that the kinds of work that we're doing at SERC and the Fisheries Conservation Lab, and that others are doing at Smithsonian, and some of the opportunities for future collaborations, like Autumn-Lynn alluded to, do touch on a lot of the issues that we're highlighting in the ocean strategy and life on a sustainable planet, related to questions about fisheries management, marine protected area design, and the responses of migratory species and ecosystems to climate change, to environmental restoration, and also to human activities and infrastructure development. And I'm also going to touch on offshore wind, because it's one of the really big things that's going on. And a lot of the work that I've been doing, we've been doing in our lab at SERC, is really focused on some of our local species in the Chesapeake Bay and in the Mid-Atlantic. But it's a really interesting area to ask a lot of these questions and think about how the answers to questions can be applied in other locations. We're in a place that's experiencing really rapid warming, especially species in the Mid-Atlantic that are expected to shift distributions into the Gulf of Maine, which is one of the parts of the global ocean that's warming faster than just about anywhere else. So we're understanding our species is going to help understand where they will go with climate change. We also live in one of the parts of the ocean in the Mid-Atlantic region that has some of the most dramatic seasonal temperature shifts. So we have a lot of migratory species, and they're moving a long ways in response to seasonal changes, among other things. And finally, we're focused a lot on species that are either species of conservation concern or species that have been ignored by a lot of other groups. So we do work on blue crabs, striped bass, some of the really popular fishery species. But I'm going to show some examples today of work that we've been doing on species that have been heavily impacted by past fisheries. And we have rebuilding plans for a lot of those populations now. Some are working better than others. And so we're really focused on trying to collect some data to help find solutions to rebuild populations of species that were impacted by fisheries in the past and which aren't responding as rapidly to some standard conservation practices as some other species out there. So I wanted to start just by touching on some of these key themes and some of the projects that we're doing, and then I'll build into the collaborative networks part of this talk. So one of the first species that we started tracking in our lab, sort of at the outset of Movement of Life, as the ideas behind Movement of Life were first starting to come together, is this one, the cow-nose ray. And this is one that's been interesting because it's become a popular recreational fishery. People bow hunt for it. And the latest thing now is using blow darts to hunt them. People are doing that in the Chesapeake. It's also a species that got a bad reputation from a couple of high-profile publications that suggested, we think probably wrongly, that it decimated clam and scallop and oyster populations up and down the East Coast, strangely, even in places where these species don't occur. So there have been some published rebuttals that we weren't involved in from that, but the species still has this reputation as a nuisance, and there have been people interested in targeting them to reduce their populations to reduce this perceived negative impact. The work that we've done has been published so far in 2 different papers, but there's more on the way. One of the things we were trying to do related to sustainable fisheries is using migration information to evaluate the stock structure and also identify the overwintering habitat. So one of the interesting things about cow-nose rays is that they were in the bay in the summer, left in the winter, and no one really knew where they went. So we tagged cow-nose rays in Maryland and Virginia. We have collaborators who also tag them in coastal Georgia during the summer. The summer is the season when they're in sort of coastal bays and estuaries, giving birth to their pups, and then mating. So it's a time of year when they're spread out all along the coast. And then in the fall, they disappear from the bays and estuaries. So all the ones we've tracked so far, and there's one other study that used some satellite tags that received similar results. They head down along the coast in the fall and overwinter in the area around Cape Canaveral off the east coast of Florida. So it looks like they're overwintering in that area and then spreading out along the coast in the summer for foraging and reproduction and other things. The second paper on this list identified temperature as one of the key migration cues, but also looked at other migration cues, and we've started thinking about what the predicted impacts of climate change might be on migrations of this species. Shifting to sharks for a minute, we've worked on a couple of species of sharks, one of which is the dusky shark, which is a species, along with a lot of shark species, that was overfished and had severe population declines along the east coast of the US. And our shark fisheries management in the US really sort of strengthened at that time, and fisheries are some of the better managed shark fisheries in the world, and populations of a lot of sharks have rebounded. This is a species that the population hasn't rebounded as much. And so we're trying to learn more about where they go and what they're doing, particularly when they're juveniles. like this one shown here, because the juveniles are often captured when people are going out doing recreational fishing for other species like blacktip sharks that are more common and can be accidentally caught during that time. So what we found with this one is that, or what we were working on is looking at the timing of occurrence in a seasonal marine protected area that's shown on this map in the sort of purple outline. That's a wintertime shark fishing closure area off the coast of North Carolina because a lot of species of sharks overwinter there. And we found that they actually show up there for about a month before that closure goes into place. And recommended that there haven't been changes in management because some of those take a long time. But the recommendation from this work is that they consider shifting the timing of that protected area so that it better protects these sharks when they first show up there in the late fall. But one of the interesting other things that came from this is that the tag detection locations shown in the gray dots, most of the detections we got further out in the ocean, such as the ones highlighted in the inset, were detected in offshore wind energy development areas. So this is also a species with a distribution that really overlaps with a lot of the offshore wind energy development that's going to be happening over the next decade. We have a paper that's very close to coming out on bull sharks in Florida. Bull sharks are one of a number of sharks that may roam widely as adults, but they have relatively few very restricted juvenile nursery habitats. And one of those is in the Indian River Lagoon system in Florida, where the known juvenile habitat was primarily in the area around Cape Canaveral down to Sebastian Inlet. So the work that we did down there showed, and this was done by Michelle Edwards and Chuck Bangley, who are shown with me here, shows that they're using nursery habitats much further south, all the way down past St. Lucie Inlet. And then during the wintertime, they're actually spending a fair bit of time offshore when it gets cold. So there's this is expanding by up to 100 kilometers in Indian River Lagoon, the known juvenile habitat for this species, which we hope will ultimately be incorporated into fishery management plans for sharks. And finally, our latest project, that's a migratory connectivity project, is on the alewife, which is a fish that comes, it's an anadromous fish. So it's a migratory fish, kind of like salmon, that lives mostly in the ocean, but comes into freshwater streams to spawn during the springtime. So the lab is out doing a lot of that work right now. But for the first time this year, we tagged some of these with tags that we can use to track their ocean migrations. And so we tagged 50 individuals this spring, and they're in the process of working their way out of Chesapeake Bay. We tagged them in the location of the star, but we really don't know where they're going to go in the ocean. There's been some work done on ocean catches of the species, trying to use genetic methods to trace them back to the bays and estuaries they come from, but the species ranges from about the South Carolina, North Carolina border up into Canada. And we really don't have a good handle on where the fish that spawn in certain rivers go during the summer. So this will be one of the first studies to try to figure that out. We think it's going to be in the circle somewhere off of Long Island and Cape Cod. So we'll let you know next year. But the common feature for all of these studies, and why I'm talking about, or getting to talking about networking and networks of networks, is that we're tracking these fish using a technology called acoustic telemetry, where we typically surgically implant or sometimes attach externally a tag that sends out an acoustic signal, a series of clicks that encodes a unique ID number. So for example, we haven't tagged them, but the sand tiger shark might be tagged and sends out this signal every few minutes. And then it might be picked up on a receiver like the one shown in the bottom here, that's an underwater microphone or hydrophone. And then researchers go out and download these a few times a year and have to share that data out with all the people who might have tagged animals that swim by that receiver. So if you work on a species that stays put, it's very easy to do this work by yourself and you don't have to share data. But for migratory species, you rely on the whole network of researchers using similar technology to be able to understand where these animals are going. This particular one is located at Frying Pan Tower, which is off the North Carolina-South Carolina border. This is actually one of our receivers that we work with a researcher at Coastal Carolina University to deploy. So it's right here where this arrow points. But then this map shows all of the recent deployments of similar receivers from Canada to South Florida and a little bit into the Gulf of Mexico that are part of a continental scale telemetry network that we've been involved in setting up. So at SERC, we lead the Atlantic Cooperative Telemetry Network, and Kim Ritchie is the data manager for that network and coordinator, and really spends a lot of time coordinating people, but also their data. And this is, as you can sort of see, the green dots on here generally goes from North Carolina up into Maine. And then there are other networks shown here in other colors working in other places. So we have the FAC network to the south. That's sort of Florida and the Caribbean. And both of our networks are part of the US Animal Telemetry Network, which is focused on ocean animal telemetry and is sort of aggregating data at a national level. So there's a national database that primarily currently houses satellite telemetry data, and some of Autumn-Lynn's data are in there. But our sort of regional networks that use this acoustic telemetry technology are working with the US Animal Telemetry Network on how to scale up and aggregate the acoustic data into a national system. Talk about that a little bit more. The system that we use for data management was developed by the Ocean Tracking Network in Canada, who coordinates all of these blue dots to our north. But also works with our networks and a number of others around the world to help standardize the data and data management so that we can scale this up. And so we started working on our database in about 2018 in an intensive way to get it working. It became operational in about 2020. When that happened, we also connect and share data with these two networks. So any of our fish that we tag can be detected on any one of these receivers, and we automatically get that data several times a year through this data sharing network we've established. I just want to touch a bit on the Atlantic Cooperative Telemetry Network. That is the regional network that we lead. This is just a different map showing some of those receiver locations that are in our database. And each different color on this is a different project. Some researchers have one project, some have multiple projects, but it gives you the sense of some of the scales of these projects. So these are often small scale projects that together in aggregation make for a relatively large tracking system. But you also see that there's a lot of places in the ocean where they don't exist. So that's a potential future opportunity to be leaders at Smithsonian in developing networks that help us cover more of the ocean. But the reason this technology is really valuable is that Autumn-Lynn was able to show satellite tracking data for animals at a global scale. Most ocean animals don't come to the surface, and you can't use satellite telemetry to track their movements. So building up this kind of acoustic telemetry network is a way to study all of those other species that aren't coming to the surface, or even species that, like some sharks, that spend part of the year coming up to the surface and other parts of the year don't. This type of technology can be used to track their movements. Our network currently has 163 members. Some of those are government agency folks and others who aren't actively doing tracking, but our database has 97 projects covering 47 species and currently has about 2,500 active tags. So there are a lot of animals swimming around the mid-Atlantic that have been tagged by members of our network. The FACT network to our south has just as many active tags. So between us, there's something like 5,000 tags off the east coast of the US that are in animals swimming around different places. And our database is up to about 21 million animal detections now. So it's a database that's fairly rapidly growing and has a long ways to go as we're still bringing in historical data sets and new projects. We're working on a couple of aspects beyond database management and thinking about where these receivers might be deployed. We're doing capacity building in a couple different ways. One is working with the Ocean Tracking Network and NOAA's Chesapeake Bay office to provide trainings on analyzing acoustic telemetry data. The NOAA office is leading a workshop this summer on extracting satellite data or data from satellite products for acoustic telemetry. So some of their satellite folks are working on that training. And then this year we initiated a student conference travel award from our network. The first one was awarded to Nick Coleman, who happens to have been a former Movement of Life intern at SERC, but who's finishing up a master's at University of Maryland on Atlantic sturgeon, shown here. So we're trying to provide, through these conference awards, provide opportunities for students from underrepresented groups in STEM to be able to attend conferences. We're also doing some work on trying to improve telemetry array design to better answer questions. In the Chesapeake Bay in the past, we've had sort of a hodgepodge of different people's projects in different places. But we've been working with the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, a couple of state agencies and University of Maryland to deploy this new array, which just went into the water over the last year, that has 3 lines across different parts of the bay that'll help us understand how fishery species are moving up and down the bay and in and out to the ocean in ways that we haven't before, because there haven't been these receiver lines that cross the main bay. So this is intended as a sort of a hopefully permanent backbone array that you can build off of and plan that it will be there for when you write proposals. And then I want to highlight just a few new projects we have going on and next steps that sort of build on this scaling up of telemetry networks theme. The first is that we've just started a new grant that's led by University of New Hampshire and Nathan Fury, who gave a talk in one of these meetings last year, where we're synthesizing some of our telemetry data along with a variety of different types of environmental data to show how telemetry data can be used in Chesapeake Bay for fisheries management, for understanding climate change, and for other uses. So this will start to get at some of what Autumn-Lynn mentioned about how we can use telemetry data for fisheries, for supporting coastal communities, for thinking about climate change and its impacts on fishermen and fisheries species and other things in the bay. So we have one postdoc on that, Henry Leggett, who's already at SERC, but will be starting officially on this project this summer. And there's a second postdoc that just accepted the position at University of New Hampshire. And she'll be starting August 1st, I think. So we're really getting this project off the ground now. We're also scaling up telemetry to address energy infrastructure in a couple of ways. One is a new collaboration with folks at SCBI, Jimena and Martin, tagging diamond stingrays and hopefully other species in Peru and looking at their habitat use around the natural gas terminal in Peru, where Jimena's been working for a long time. And we're also starting a series of conversations with some of the other regional telemetry networks in the US about how we can shift from this current framework where we have a hodgepodge of different telemetry receiver arrays to having a hopefully centrally funded US array on the east and west coast, potentially also the Gulf Coast that's designed and implemented in a way that it's going to give us much more power to answer questions about the potential impacts of offshore wind energy development. And just to give a bit more sense of scale for this wind energy on the East Coast, there's something like 2,000 turbines planned to be installed in the next 10 years. So we're talking about major hard infrastructure in a place that doesn't typically have that kind of hard surface, doesn't have a lot of reefs or other hard structure in the ocean. So it's really going to change the ocean along the Atlantic coast of the US very quickly. We also have a couple proposals that we submitted that are focused on integrating telemetry data, environmental DNA, bioacoustics from marine mammals, and oceanography in wind energy areas off the East Coast to understand both how we can prepare for potential impacts of wind energy development, but also hopefully use these technologies to track changes over time. And then I'm a co-PI on a project that's funded currently by the, there's a current project that's funded by the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network and Animal Telemetry Network called BioTrack. That's a data synthesis project targeted at identifying and tracking biodiversity hotspots using satellite data. I'm a co-PI on the next proposal, which will bring in a lot more acoustic telemetry data and also provide a large number of new tags to researchers to put out on new species. And then finally, I'm hoping that we can develop some proposal ideas and funding to expand the sort of large scale, long distance tracking we're doing with acoustic telemetry right now to fine scale arrays with more closely spaced receivers that allow for real-time tracking of species over small areas. And I'm hoping to use this to study fish use of coastal restoration sites, in particular oyster reef restoration that's going on in Chesapeake Bay. So I hope this gives a sense of some of the ways that the types of ways that we've been using acoustic telemetry and the types of questions that we're addressing and hope to continue addressing, but also how sort of set the stage for how Movement of Life and Smithsonian can be a leader in continuing to scale up some of telemetry networks and data synthesis projects to really play a leading role in informing decisions on oceans in the US and elsewhere.
Thank you, Matt. That was a really great talk. And yeah, I'm excited about all these next steps as well. So we have, let's see, what do we have? We have plenty of time for questions and kind of envision this as, more of like a roundtable discussion to ask basic questions about the talks, but also talk about how we might begin integrating some of these ideas into Ellen's bigger ideas about life on a sustainable planet. So I might kick us off with one to both of you guys about, I think, kind of playing off of Ellen's interest in creating actionable solutions for ecosystem managers. What are some of the barriers or the major barriers, I guess, that you guys see to getting our science integrated with conservation action, and kind of with an eye towards the things that we can control? So like, do we need better communications? So do we need to be integrating agencies better with our scientific process? What are there some common threads that you guys have both identified in your work for this? And I'm going to try to take off spotlight in the meantime.
I have one that I think is relevant to everybody studying animal movement with some kind of tracking device, and that I think sample size is always an issue, and getting the work taken seriously enough to change minds and make management decisions. That there's always a criticism that we're not actually describing the population level or species level pattern with a small number of individuals. And so it's easy to dismiss the tracking data. But When I'm thinking about offshore wind planning, tracking data can give you types of information that just isn't possible by other survey methods. So I think, having this nuance like be explained and really showing where tracking data can complement existing sources of data is really important. Like, flight heights aren't always easy to get at, but basically the where the animals are going to after they leave a wind farm is something you can't get from survey data. You might know the density of animals there at a certain time, but you don't know where they've come from or where they're going to. And so these are all really important questions for managing at the population level, because that's where the declines are. So I think that nuance is important. And then I think the fragmented nature of where all the data live has prevented the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management from really investing in trying to include tracking data and quantitative methods to integrate survey data with tracking data. It has also been a limitation. It's like the holy grail, I would say, quantitatively.
Yeah, we certainly see the low sample size issue, and like with our alewife study that I mentioned that we just started, we're tagging one population that's very small compared to the coastwide population that's in one river. So, really being able to scale that up coastwide to understand, if they're going the same places or if they're all going different places and how that changes from year to year, and different oceanographic conditions and things is going to be really critical to making those useful. So we're hoping that this little pilot project helps launch that. And people have seen that with other species. I think with the acoustic telemetry, the Atlantic sturgeon have been, they're an endangered species. There's been a lot of research effort on them, and they're well over 1,000, probably 1,200 or so that have been tagged. And those data are now being used in some of the endangered species and fisheries assessments for that species, because they're providing information on survival rates and other kinds of sort of basic biological data that feed into population models. And so that sort of thing has really been critical. I think for acoustic telemetry, two of the, well, I guess one is more sort of for the offshore wind energy part. One of the challenges, and I guess for fisheries management, but one of the challenges is really engaging with some of the different agencies and other funders to try to coordinate the efforts of what's going on. So, we see opportunities for linking studies and deploying receiver arrays in better ways that will allow us to as a research community to answer questions about what's going on much better. But for now, all of those projects are being funded individually, and no one's really thinking at the big picture. So that's why we're starting some of these discussions about how we can better coordinate, and can we come up with a national plan, and can we convince the funders and agencies to require all of the different players in that area to play together a little bit. So that's certainly an area in acoustic telemetry that's a huge problem, because we're so limited by where there are receivers out there in the water, and what the design of that is like for the kinds of questions that we're able to answer. That's a major challenge.
Any other questions from the group? Or ideas?
Yes.
Yeah, Jessica.
Just kind of like following on that question. I mean, this is something that I struggle with all the time. Like, we collect all this data, and there are some agencies and some organizations, some companies that understand that they need this data, but then there's like a whole suite of people making decisions that have no idea. That it's just so, they have no idea what this data could be used for or what it means to them. So I guess sort of a two-part question, you know, have we done any outreach specifically about movement data to maybe some of the, it's like kind of like PR, like any outreach to explain sort of what the data, what kinds of questions the data can answer, and to also show people how it's accessible. Like the tools that you were showing, both Autumn-Lynn and Matt, I mean, seem like great tools that I could see consultants, environmental consultants, or even like big funding agencies like the IFC they love that kind of stuff, those platforms that help support decision making, but do they even know they exist, and do they know how to use them? So yeah, it's a big question, but is there a way that we could get more involved in training people? And sorry, just on that, the last thing I'll say is I learned, I think last year, that the Wilson Center, for example, has these courses where they train policy, like people in congressional staffers and Congress people sometimes, like on science, and they give them a lesson on what a whole 2-week course, I think, on what science means and how they can use it for making decisions. Is there anything like that?
I can
Yeah, go,
I was going to see if anyone from the group wanted to chime in with their experience, but yeah, I think we've explored a few different models for this. So the MICO system that I showed is one model where we're doing the work behind the scenes to do a derived product that could be more interpretable. And we've tried to get funding for like stakeholder and user testing and input, but we've not been able to get funding for that. So there's always that disconnect in building the tool, but are you doing it in a way that's actually usable? And we've done a lot of outreach, or the whole team has, with the UN. So at Convention on Migratory Species, and the UN has funded part of this. So they're looking to it as one of their tools. But another model that we're experimenting with the Shorebird Collective is not leaving it to the manager or the user to have to do the analysis themselves, that the data are available. They live in repositories now. More and more data are becoming public. But with the Shorebird Collective, we hired Allie, and we clearly reached our capacity with how much she can do. But we hired a quantitative ecologist to ingest the problem statement and then work on doing that analysis for the manager. So, they have the question, they think the movement data are relevant. We can explore the data and see if they are relevant, and then produce a product that they can use for their questions. So we're kind of working in this almost consultancy model, but like for the benefit of the manager. And yeah, so that's a model we're experimenting with in these first 3 years of the Shorebird Collective. And I think we have a lot of work to do on outreach as well, but even so, we've gotten more project requests than we can handle even in the first 6 months.
So your model, Autumn-Lynn, is that you have some method for receiving questions. I mean, is it that simple? Like that?
So far, the method is ad hoc and opportunistic. We have an advisory group who can connect us with different teams, and we've presented at a couple of meetings. But I think we'll think about more strategic outreach in the future, and we're working on a request form as well on the Smithsonian website, where someone could request, do you have data on this species or shorebirds? But I do think there is a challenge, like you said, Jesse, about people not knowing what they can get from movement data as well. Even just something we've heard from many managers looking at on the ground shorebird management is turnover rates. So they have a good idea of density measures at a site, but they don't know individual turnover rates. And they use that parameter in model estimates and in harvest estimates or take estimates. And so even something like that, something was like parameter that's used in a model, can come from tracking data that they can't get anywhere else. And so finding out those unique things about the tracking data. And then when we've mentioned it to other managers, they're like, yes, we really need that. So it's been surprising, just finding those little things that managers really need that they didn't realize they could get from movement data.
And do you have any criteria for questions that you're prioritizing or anything? I'm asking because we've kind of tried the same model with the corridor, Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridor Collaborative, and have had a really difficult time actually getting the agencies to ask a question, even of data they are collecting, like beyond, you know, where are animals going? Like, and I think I do agree that I think a big part of it is just understanding what can be asked of the data without without overwhelming people. And so, yeah, how have you guys, it sounds like you haven't had trouble, I guess, getting questions, but have you had trouble getting questions that would be like broadly, are you trying to get broadly applicable questions, or is it really just if this is helping an agency, we'll do it?
Yeah, and Candace or Allie, please chime in if you're still on. We just opened the discussion with our advisory group about prioritization, because I think a lot of the questions we're getting, some of them are education or outreach focused, and not everyone on the advisory group thinks that's important. You know, there's a lot of power to 2,000 shorebird tracks that have been contributed to this. So we are interested in higher level questions that could be generally applicable, but we haven't gotten them from the managers themselves yet. And not every data contributor is willing to do that synthesis level quite yet. It's like early days, you know, so we're taking the ad hoc approach, but we're quickly realizing the limits that we're going to have to do some prioritization. And we're hoping that the advisory group can help with that. Like, what is most critical for shorebird conservation in the hemisphere, you know, and how should we prioritize the questions we've been receiving? But we've gotten questions ranging from, I would like to feature a movement path of a Hudsonian godwit in a comic to give to a native village, to conservation easement identification. Here's a range of potential conservation easements adjacent to a protected area. Do you know the connectivity of these easements to the rest of the hemisphere? Are there any tracked shorebirds that stop through here? Can we inform the selection process from tracking data and eBird data, really? But so yeah, it's been a mix, but I think, you know, we're year one, so I'm hoping some of this will develop more strategically as we move forward. But
yeah, I would say, just chiming in here, we have had a wide variety of requests, like Autumn-Lynn has said. There hasn't, especially because we haven't done like a outreach campaign to request, you know, questions, but it's been very broad. I mean, some have been very local projects, which is of interest to the funding agency, NOGLAC. They really want to see on the ground local conservation. So that's great that we've had those requests. But then even larger requests like, you know, Environment Canada through their management plan is interested in seeing essentially our tracks of shorebirds following these managed populations, these population management units that they have. So the requests are very large and broad, and which is great. Like, we can see there is definitely a need for combining the data together for very applied purposes, but it's, you know, like Autumn-Lynn said, how do we prioritize these requests going forward is kind of the question right now as we're pulling the data together.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've had two areas we've been trying to develop funding for that kind of get at this question. So the NOAA project I mentioned that we're starting with University of New Hampshire, you know, that funding specifically was to demonstrate to management stakeholders in the Chesapeake Bay the value of existing data sets, telemetry data sets, and environmental data and other things in the region. And so it was a fairly wide open funding call. We were excited they selected our project. And, you know, part of the goal is to try to build support for more telemetry, but doing that, showing how exactly it can be used in fisheries management decision-making by the states in the Chesapeake Bay or the federal government for species that are managed by the federal government. And you know, we'll see how that goes, but that's a core part of that project. And then we also, for the Atlantic Cooperative Telemetry Network, one of the things we've done is incorporate our network into the current 5-year funding cycle for a group called Maricus, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association Coastal Ocean Observing System. So it is sort of our funding currently flows through them, but has been on a kind of ad hoc annual basis, and unfortunately still is, because they didn't get a budget increase for the same reasons that Ellen mentioned. She didn't either. But if we hopefully are transitioned into their operational budget at some point over this 5-year funding cycle, that funding includes the basic data management that we're doing, but also funding to develop case studies from examples from researchers in our network for how their data are being used in decision making, whether it's for fisheries or offshore wind or other things. So we're hoping to be able to get that funding so we can work on writing and publishing some of these case studies that demonstrate the use of telemetry data. So we'll see how that goes. But those are it's been an area now that our program is a little bit more established. We have more data, been trying to integrate data into some of these larger scale projects and projects that have at least a component that's emphasizing the value of those data and how they're being used.
Just seeing Autumn-Lynn's comment in the chat.
Grammatically difficult to read comment.
Oh, what?
Yeah, it's a stream of consciousness, but I think, I would love to see a paper analyzing these big decision support tools and really how they're being used. Some are, I know for wind farm development off the East Coast, there are some tools that at least the wind consultancies are using. I don't know if the managers, like the agency managers, are using them, but the wind consultancies are definitely using them. So if they're going to make money, they're going to find the data and the way to use these tools. But I'm really seeing this need for more of a co-development of the analyses, and I think that's where and that's time consuming and takes resources and interpretation of language between the sides. But I think the co-development of the analyses lead to it being used, lead to the science being used in management.
Yeah, I was part of a SNAP proposal to create a tool to help people navigate all the tools that are out there. And to be honest, I was a little uncomfortable with the whole idea. I think it's needed, but I was also like, I don't know, this is circular too. And I still don't really know the solution, but there's just, especially with global, with UN Sustainable Development Goals, things to support those types of analyses. There's so many, I feel like every conservation agency has a platform that someone can use for something, and there is no holistic review of or really good understanding of which one to use. And I think that's been part of our challenge with the Corridor Collaborative, is even at a smaller scale. They do want to, a lot of agencies would love to have a tool, a plug and play tool for mapping corridors, but getting them, but they get over, I still don't know how to present them with multiple options and the caveats. It's like when you present them with the options and the caveats, then I feel like we all get stuck. Actually, we needed them to tell us what their priorities were really in the end, I guess. And at least that would help, I guess. But at the same time, there's a lot of, or yeah, go ahead, Michael. Are you going to say?
No, well, that's part of the planning process. I see a lot of parallels between what we're doing with Giraffe as well. We're operating right now in 11 different countries and 32 or 36 some odd sites. And each one, like you, we have different sort of hierarchical structures and research questions where you have sort of, I mean, we look for like to tick 3 boxes with each tagging operation we do. One is, we want to have actionable data for conservation management on the ground. So that's liaising with whatever the relevant management authority is. Often it's range state level government authorities, and then like the local protected area authority or local conservancy authority or community agency. And then we also have site specific research goals. So what about this specific area is unique, and what about the uniqueness of this area? Can we cast new insights onto space use, movement ecology? And then looking at it sort of at the broad scale, the continental scale, how do we throw all of these data together from all of these different sites and analyze them in a consistent manner with to develop these synthetic understandings of, for us, as giraffe space use. And functionally, what it's come down to is sitting down with managers in every single area and working with them, because oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. And like you were saying, Autumn-Lynn, they want dots on the map. But our goal is to get it beyond dots on a map and to, cast some unique ecological insights. And compare what they have in their sites to what's going on in other sites, and where can we learn lessons, and where can we take the uniqueness of those particular sites to sort of expand the global knowledge of the ecology of these systems. But what it's come down to is mostly communications, and then for us, developing tools for sharing those data in real time. So beyond the packaged analysis, beyond the final report is, we worked hard to develop these platforms for real-time sharing of giraffe telemetry data, so that you can sort of develop this local knowledge. A manager can log on in the morning when he's drinking his coffee and look at where the giraffe are in space and time, and glean some sort of insight and feel like they're a part of the process and collecting the data and asking questions and that sort of thing. But I don't know, your systems are a little more complicated in that you're looking at inter-population movement oftentimes, and we're looking at intra-population movement. I think that adds another layer of complexity. But for us, it's been, just sitting down with them and trying to, coach them through the questions.
So if we're going to distill some of these challenges and needs into this document for Ellen, and I know this, we'll do this with some dedicated time moving forward, but are there major items that are top of people's lists right now that you think we should have in there of think this is the challenge and this is what we see as the solution, as far as getting our science into managers' hands in a useful way?
I do think that role of the connector or the liaison is really important. Like sometimes I don't even have time to put my data in like the repository or to organize it, but even to think about how it can be used more, that it's in the repository, and that kind of impact liaison I've always wanted, at Smithsonian, to think about what are the ways these data could be used, and maybe that some of that's PR, but some of it's actually like serving that interpretation step. And the scientists, like I feel woefully underprepared to really be that person myself sometimes, and really understand what the manager is dealing with on the ground, and having that interpretive conversation where you're each trying to understand each other. And so with the Shorebird Collective, we also have, conservation specialists in Canada's that can help play that role. And so we're trying this all out, but still the scientist needs to be there to understand the limitations of the data too. So it's a complicated situation, but.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to dig into more of what we can learn from, even, I know it's early days for Shorebird Collective, but I think this model would be potentially a helpful place to think about scaling up.
But also the other models, like it's really neat for me to hear similar solutions, have emerged with different projects, and I'm really enjoying this conversation to hear how other people are solving this problem too. And we all have this clear urge to get our data used. So it's cool to hear everyone else's solutions.
Yeah, I thought maybe, I guess we're coming close to the end of our time, but I thought it might be helpful if Autumn-Lynn and I comment just a little bit on some of how the ocean strategy
That'd be great.
discussions have gone. So to help get other people thinking about a terrestrial strategy document and what you might put in there. I mean, I think Ellen described fairly well how the process has gone. For the ocean strategy, TUC at SERC, with help from Cole and a couple of other people, sort of gathered some initial ideas into an initial draft. And then Josh Tewksbury at STRI added some stuff and shifted it around a little bit. And then it went to natural history and NZP and shifted around again. And there was sort of 3 or 4 different perspectives on how you might put together a document like this. And then now Ellen pulled together a strategy meeting a couple of weeks ago that was part in person and part virtual, with about 20 people to describe more in detail what she's hoping to get from all of us. And we've had a Google Doc that we've been populating, which is now, I don't know how many pages it is now, but it's got to be 15 pages of long list of everyone's programs that they want to see in there. It's getting closer to some of the higher level questions and 3, 5, and 10-year needs that she's looking for. But it's been a process. And so, I think helping to really think through what some of the key questions and next steps and, what we need to raise funding for is going to be really helpful. I don't know, Autumn-Lynn, what your thoughts are on the process or advice or comments, but that's kind of how the nuts and bolts of how it's gone in brief.
Yeah, I guess this is what I have been thinking about in the background since Ellen, basically started off this talk with all of us. I mean, we're obviously one of the few initiatives at the Smithsonian that has multiple units working together, which we've always highlighted as a strength. And I think this is certainly now an opportunity where we could put some thoughts on paper and start that process to be able to provide to her directly. And in some ways, maybe it's kind of like this white paper or the evolution of where we are with movement of life, and putting down these thoughts for her as deliverables of what our initiative actually does. Maybe that allows us also to help her help us, and also the advancement team help us to find opportunities to fund these things. So this hasn't been something that we've done in a long time. We've thought about it. I think the lessons learned from the ocean side, potentially is really helpful for us to not just describe the terrestrial side, but to describe our initiative and what we would like to do 3, 5, 10 years.
Yeah, I think that bottom-up approach could be really valuable, because that's not the approach that was taken with the ocean strategy. And even the in-person meeting, each unit director was allowed to invite up to 2 people. And so I wasn't in that meeting. And I reached out to Will and just said I was interested in the process. And that's how I started putting input into the strategy document. So it was like the number of voices that were participating was actually quite limited, but or at least varied across the units. So I think TUC engaged a wider audience for feedback quite early on, and we had no broad engagement at NZCBI at all. So I think, we got to contribute to an initial summary document, and then now Jimena and Mary Hagedorn and I have been contributing to the ocean strategy document. But if we had had more, bottom up strength and having our thing, if we had had these discussions amongst ourselves first, that would have been really nice.
Go ahead, Mel.
I think that's a good point, what Jared was saying about the white paper, and I guess it's 26 pages, Autumn said, but earlier Jesse shared WLS strategy, science strategy. I mean, there's been so much thinking and effort into these documents. So this, I think going back to Ellen is not about, let's have a meeting and think about, like, we need to dig into that and we need to make it, I think going back to, the points that she was making about things she wants to see, pulling it out of there, making it more succinct and, really building on what we've already done, because we have talked a lot and there's been a lot of great thinking going into these documents and just this effort in general. So I think, definitely let's not reinvent anything, but try to move forward and get her some things that she's going to get excited about. I hope she watches these programs. They're both fantastic. And as I was watching, I was like, yes, that's exactly what she was just saying she wanted to hear about. So, hopefully she'll get to see them.
We'll definitely send them to her. I think she will. I mean, she watched the highlights. Pretty much every, even like just all MOL emails, she's responded to almost everyone to ask for more information about something. So she's
It's great to hear how
watching.
excited she is about MOL and WLS for them.
Yeah, I know we need to go. I was just wondering, in general, is WLS doing something similar? Should we try to be coordinating? I mean, I feel like it will happen naturally anyways, because all of our recent strategic planning documents, we were really trying to do together. So, but is that something we still want to do?
Good to try to coordinate.
Yeah.
So we should talk more about that.
Yeah, I do think to the extent that you can say, these are the things that we need to be doing and the things that we need to be able to do those. And, drop in little hints here that, this is something that WLS has been advancing and we've built this track record of doing this, and sort of same for movement of life. Or these are things we're working together on, that are existing programs. I think that just strengthens that, giving her, here's the question that we're trying to address, here are the successes that we've had as WLS and MOL are working together. And here are the next steps to scale up that impact. That really is what she's looking for. So yeah, absolutely. The more we can draw from what we've done, what the documents are that we already have, that's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Much over that. Yeah, so much. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I think this was a great meeting, and really appreciate Autumn-Lynn and Matt for taking the lead on the presentation. They were really wonderful, and we'll share them around. And anything last minute before we go from anyone? All right. Well, really great to see you guys, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Lacey.
All right.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lacey.
Bye.
Thanks, Lacey.